Welcome, my friend. I'm MPC, and over the past week, I've just been raging over Streets of Rage 4. See how I did that? And after playing the game for a little bit under a week and playing every single character at this point, I'd say, hey, why not try and make a tier list for you guys? And since Streets of Rage has been out for pretty much over a week at this point, and now that I've been able to play every single character in the game, I decided, hey, why not try and make a tier list? I am honored and now happy to present you the Streets of Rage 4 tier list. Foremost, this is a personal tier list, so this is just kind of my personal opinion and based on my speculation after playing every single character in the game. First and foremost, this is a personal tier list, so this is just kind of my personal opinion and based on my speculation after playing every single character in the game. Also, to my knowledge, this is the very first, this is the vanilla patch of the game. So as far as I know, when making this video on May 7th, 2020, nothing has changed to the game yet. So this is a vanilla tier list. Now, with beat 'em ups, they don't really buff or nerf characters, not that I'm aware of often, so chances are this list isn't going to really be affected that much down the road, but in case some characters were to get buffed or nerfed, I will change some things on the tier list if it is requested enough. Now, I did hear rumor of DLC characters, but don't quote me on that, I could be very wrong. But in the case there is actual DLC characters coming, I will make a separate video just for them and just slap them on this very tier list right here. Now, there's going to be many factors to how I'm going to grade each character. So the first thing is the moves each character has themselves. I'll be going into detail on some of the characters' moves to determine how good they are. For example, how fast do they recover after doing the move, how big the hitbox, how much damage, kind of small little details that vary in factoring a character's move. Kind of similar to a fighting game tier list. I'm not going to really be talking about the supers that much because if you're trying to get a high grade or try and beat higher level difficulties, then you're going to be not using your super that much or at all in that fact. I'm mainly going to be talking about optimal play, which doesn't really include your super, so I'm going to probably be very limited with me talking about supers as, like I said, it's not really optimal for playing perfectly. If you look at the tier list, the character that is the closest to the letter of the list they're in, or the tier they're in, the stronger they are in that tier. So that's just something you can take to consideration when I make it. Now, the characters, that doesn't mean the character is necessarily better than the one behind them, but it's just kind of a rough estimate. There's really not too much of a difference if a character is closer to the letter than another one, for example. It's just kind of a rough estimate. So, starting on the tier list, who I think is the very worst character in this entire game is Streets of Rage 1 Blaze. To really understand why she's bad in particular is you need to understand how Streets of Rage 1 characters work. First off, their movement is incredibly limited, unlike every other character. And worst of all, they have no specials of any kind. So for a Streets of Rage 1 character to be really good, the limited moves they have to be very strong. In Blaze's case, they are all pretty much horrible. Especially the one thing that needs to be good, her combo attack, which is probably the worst thing about her if you ask me. Now, it is nice that it's 5 hits, but the biggest problem is the last hit has horrible recovery. She goes into like this weird little somersault thing, and it takes her forever to recover, and it gives the opponents way too much time to get a free hit on you, which is really bad and a big problem in Streets of Rage 4 more now than ever. Now, ironically, if you ever played Streets of Rage 1, you'll know that Blaze is supposed to be the most agile character in that game. That hasn't really translated well to Streets of Rage 4, as you can tell, as not only is she pretty slow compared to majority of the cast, but she has some of the weakest damage in the game with no fundamental movement at all, pretty much making her the definitive worst character in this game. Now, one thing I'd like to add before continuing on is that I think pretty much every character is viable to beat Mania and get high grades, except for this character. I think this is pretty much the only unplayable character who just cannot do well at all. She is pretty much leagues below any other character, if you ask me. But not too far away from the next character I want to talk about. That next character in the 16th place is Zan. Now, if you ask me, Zan is only good at one thing that he's not even good at, which is movement. He is given the Streets of Rage movement style, which gives him a run and a roll. But even with that, pretty much everything else Zan does is god-awful, if you ask me. His damage is probably the second to worst in the entire game. His specials have no range at all. His offensive special does have some range, but it leaves him incredibly vulnerable pretty much everywhere else, and he recovers a lot worse than any of the Streets of Rage 3 characters, at least. If not all the other characters in the game, besides Blaze. Streets of Rage 1 Blaze, I should say. I find this also incredibly ironic that his specials, of all things, have really shit range, because in Streets of Rage 3, he was quote-unquote designed to have the best range in the game. This is also not translated really well, as pretty much many characters have much better range than Zan and do way better damage than Zan ever will be able to do. Not to mention, speaking of damage, his combo potential is extremely lacking to my knowledge and cannot damage anyone for his life. And don't even get me started on his horrendous throws. Those are just try them for yourself. You'll know what I'm talking about. Some of them are just flat out awful throws. Going on to the next character is Streets of Rage 2 Blaze. The best way I like to describe Streets of Rage 2 Blaze is pretty much the inferior version of Streets of Rage 4 Blaze. She pretty much does everything the fourth version can do, but worse. The most notable example of this I'd like to point out is her charge attack. You know, that kind of somersault blue energy move. Streets of Rage 2 Blazes is god-awful. It has a very, very small hitbox. It does not the best damage, and she's pretty vulnerable when she does it, which is pretty bad. What does make her better than Zan and Streets of Rage 1 Blaze is that her specials do have some decent evasion, like her defensive special and her offensive special, which is kind of like a ranged attack that knocks a bunch of enemies back. But even then, it doesn't have the biggest hitbox for a offensive attack. The biggest thing to me, though, is that she does the weakest damage to bosses. She just has no combo potential at all, to my knowledge, and the damage on the bosses just perfectly demonstrates that. Even if you were to implement special moves, which keep in mind are very risky to implement as it takes away health, or has a good chance to take away health, makes her probably do the weakest amount of damage in the entire game. This next one might actually be a surprise to you, and that's going to be Streets of Rage 4 Axel. Now, unlike the previous three characters, Axel actually does pretty good damage, or I'd say average damage to say the least. He's got a pretty decent hitbox on certain moves, most notably his defensive special, the spinning fire punch. That's got a really nice hitbox and sometimes can get 2 hits in when there's not even a wall. I can't do that consistently though, and I'm not even sure if that's true. I just thought I've done it a few times, and maybe it's just because I've been at the wall every time. Another nice little feature is when you do his offensive special, the multiple punches, if you miss, it doesn't do the full attack, so it's kind of nice to recover a little faster than normal. But then the character pretty much plateaus in everything else. His moves just have horrible recovery. A good example of this is his Grand Upper. It has kind of a weak hitbox, and it's just, he recovers so slowly from doing it. I can't tell you how many times I've done that move and just get hit right after. you have a better chance of getting hit before you can spam another one, to give you an idea. Now, despite his combo potential being pretty decent, I don't think having slightly above average damage is going to make up for how horrendously slow he is and how poor his recovery is after doing a move. It is just way too weak for what you get from it. Now it's time to move on to the B tier category, starting with Cherry. The first good thing about Cherry is she's got forward momentum, good forward momentum from her charge attack. However, it does have a pretty small hitbox and does not do as much damage as what other characters can do. She can also run, so that's pretty good. But after that, there isn't too many great things about her, which is why I made her the weakest in the B category. For starters, her throws are also horrendous, but they do more damage than, say, Zan or Blaze's, and they have a much better hitbox than them. But her back throw, for example, has one of the worst in the game. The problem with the move is it does not actually throw the enemy, it only spikes them. The problem with that is when you're trying to back throw someone, you could potentially hit more than just the opponent you're throwing. When you spike the opponent, the chances of you hitting other enemies is much lower. Not to mention that she also recovers horribly when doing the move. I also want to mention that her damage is not that great, and she has probably the worst combo potential out of the entire Streets of Rage 4 cast. Next is Streets of Rage 2 Axel. Now, remember everything I talked about with Streets of Rage 4 Axel, but better. And when I mean better, I pretty much mean faster recovery on all his moves. However, that does not mean too much, as you can see. He's also faster than Streets of Rage 4 Axel, which is another big bonus he has over him. The only thing, and I'd say the only thing Streets of Rage 4 Axel has over Streets of Rage 2 Axel is the fact that Streets of Rage 4 Axel's Fire Punch has a bigger hitbox than Streets of Rage 2 Axel's, but I think Streets of Rage 2 Axel's recovers better, so it's kind of 1-in-1 with the Fire Punch. Other than that, Streets of Rage 2 Axel is basically Streets of Rage 4 Axel, but better in everything else. But only slightly, if you ask me. Overall, there's not too much difference between him and Streets of Rage 4 Axel. I think Streets of Rage 4 Axel was designed to be like the Streets of Rage 2 Axel, as the second game was, at the time, the most popular game. It might still be as of now, but I think Streets of Rage 4 might become the most popular game over time. But when they designed Streets of Rage 4 Axel, they definitely tried to replicate Streets of Rage 2 Axel as much as they can. They just, for some reason, made him a lot slower and weaker than his original version. Or his second version, I should say. Moving up one more, the next character is Streets of Rage 3 Blaze. Now, Streets of Rage 3 is kind of the similar issue with Streets of Rage 2 Blaze. She is just the same character, but instead of faster recovery on frames, she has better movement than Streets of Rage 2 Blaze. Like Zan, she is given the Streets of Rage 3 movement system, which I previously talked about. And, overall, there's not much to say. I think the only other thing she does better than Streets of Rage 2 Blaze is have a better super. Streets of Rage 2 Blaze probably has one of the worst supers in the game, and definitely has one of the worst recoveries after doing a super in the game. Next up is Streets of Rage 3 Axel. Like the previous Axels we talked about, there is really not much difference at all. Matter of fact, I think he recovers pretty much the same time as the Streets of Rage 2 Axel. I'd say the only thing he really has over Streets of Rage 4 and 2 Axel is movement. He is also given the Streets of Rage 3 movement system, but other than that, Streets of Rage 3 and 2 Axel are pretty much identical characters, and even though they are better than their newer counterpart, it really isn't saying much compared to the other characters going to be talked about. The next character, which is probably my favorite Streets of Rage 4 character, is Streets of Rage 4 Adam. I'm going to talk about his advantages first. He does have pretty good combo potential, and he's also given this kind of long dash, which does help him quite a lot with evading enemies and such. It's also great for trying to move into an enemy and doing a dash attack. His offensive special, which is the forward one, is also pretty good as it has a really long hitbox and is 2 hits. But other than that, there really isn't much else going for him. And one of the biggest weaknesses Adam has is, 1, his dash attack has almost no range. If you play Adam, you're going to find yourself whiffing your dash attack a lot and just getting hit by the enemy you anticipated to hit, ironically. Also, for some reason, he is extremely vulnerable from behind. He has a really hard time trying to deal with opponents behind him, especially when they're ganged up front and back. And if he does have a move that tries to hit an opponent from behind him, it usually does not have the best recovery, most notably his forward special, the offensive one, has really bad recovery from behind. And his defensive just has very little recovery, or is very poor recovery as well. In most cases, you're better off just trying to dash away from anyone behind you and just trying to do as much damage to enemies in front of you instead of trying to deal with them from behind you. Not to mention his super, which again, you're probably not going to be using that much, only really hits enemies from the front. He is completely exposed from behind, proving my point more that he just cannot hit enemies behind him. But other than that, he seems to be a pretty solid character. I think if they fixed his range and made his defensive special have better recovery, he would be a much more solid character. Would he move up more on the tier list? Probably not, because the next characters coming up are just so much better than him. Now, after talking about low tier and mid tier characters, it's finally time to talk about the good stuff. The good characters, the high tier characters. Starting with Streets of Rage 1 Axel. Now, let's take a quick look at what made Blaze bad. Streets of Rage 1 character with limited movement, no damage, really slow. Streets of Rage 1 Axel is slow, but he's got stuff to make up for it, unlike Blaze. Now, unlike Blaze, Streets of Rage 1 Axel actually has some things to make up for his weaknesses. Most notably, his combo attack. For starters, it actually has pretty good range, unlike Zan, who is designed to have range. It does a truckload of damage, and it has amazing recovery. You're going to hit your opponent before the opponent even gets a hit on you. My bad, let me repeat that. You're going to get a full combo before the opponent can get a single punch on you. I meant another full combo, not just one combo. I can't tell you how many times I can just sit in the corner, have a ton of enemies run at me, and just kill them all because he recovers so damn fast, no one can actually hit him in time, and the range of the move is absolutely godlike. The damage on his throws is also much more better and superior, I'd say, to Streets of Rage 1 Blaze. Unfortunately though, the only other thing that I'd say that hurts him is that he has a really poor jump attack, and only one jump attack at that. It just has very little range. And characters like Raven or Dylan can easily beat you out of your jump kick. But nevertheless, it does have pretty good recovery, and it's pretty consistent at hitting a bunch of enemies at once. And it comes out immediately. Something I forgot to talk about Streets of Rage 1 Blaze is that her kick comes out much slower. And while it does have a slightly longer hitbox, it is not by much. And Streets of Rage 1 Axel is pretty good working with it, so overall he's a really solid character and does a lot of damage. So I think he makes up for the Streets of Rage 1 fundamental problem pretty effectively. The next characters I should say, is going to be a 2-in-1, and I'm going to talk about both Streets of Rage 2 and 3 Skate. Both these characters are overall identical in most aspects, so I'm just going to go over the differences really quickly. I'd say Streets of Rage 3 Skate's offensive special is better than Streets of Rage 2 Skate's, as It lasts longer, it hits more enemies, and most notably, Streets of Rage 2 Skate's offensive special was nerfed compared to how it was in Streets of Rage 2. It just doesn't have the big hitbox it used to and does not do as much damage as it used to. Also, Streets of Rage 3 Skate's super does a little better in being effective than Streets of Rage 2 Skate's super, if that makes any sense. But apart from that, these characters are incredibly solid. Not only are they fast and have a small hitbox, making them hard to hit, but they actually do really good damage. And what I think is the best thing about them is their dash attack. Not only does it have forward momentum like Cherry's, it actually has more forward momentum than Cherry's, but it also does more damage. And what's really cool, what I found with at least Streets of Rage 3 Skate, is that you can actually slow him down and make it a standing dash attack instead of a fully forward momentum dash attack, if that makes any sense. I think it's really helpful when there's a bunch of holes, like in Stage 4. It helps you avoid any risk of falling into any pits of any type. So kind of a nice little situational tool he's got there for taking out enemies and saving his own ass. What's also kind of ironic about Skate, both Skates I should say, is that he was supposed to do the least amount of damage out of all the characters. Time has not been in favor of that statement, as you can tell, as he does very solid damage and is very fast. So basically any flaws he had or was supposed to have aren't really existent. So overall, a really good character and a very solid one. The next character I'm going to be talking about is Streets of Rage 4 Blaze. Now let's go back to Streets of Rage 2 and 3 Blaze for a second. Now, the best way I can sum up Streets of Rage 4 Blaze is everything Streets of Rage 2 Blaze can do, but much better. And I mean much better. The most notable thing she can do much better than Blaze is her cartwheel dash attack. It is just leagues above Streets of Rage 2 Blaze's dash attack and leagues, above pretty much any other character in the game, I'd say. It's probably one of the best dash attacks in the game. Now, the only disadvantage Streets of Rage 4 Blaze has is that she cannot run like Cherry, and she also has some bad recovery on some of her moves. But yet again, almost all Streets of Rage 4 characters have this issue. But she easily makes up with it with her dash attack, like I mentioned before. She does a forward jumping motion. It has a high hitbox. And what's even crazier about her dash in particular is that it's also a combo launcher and combo extender. When you hit the opponent, whether after a combo or it being the first move they're hit by, they get launched in the air. This leaves for more combo opportunity and juggles. Also, her specials, both specials I should say, have much bigger hitboxes and can sometimes get 2 hits, unlike Streets of Rage 2 and 3 Blaze, making it a much more effective tool. So despite having some poor recovery like every other Streets of Rage 4 character, she has ways to work around it and makes up for it with her great hitboxes and great evasion on majority of her moves. She's overall just a straight up strong character and just a great choice overall to use. Highly recommended character. The next character I'm going to be talking about is Streets of Rage 2 Max, but I'm just going to call him Max. Max was classically the best character in Streets of Rage 2, and I believe was the best in the remake version, but I could be wrong about that. It might have been Shiva, or maybe Mr. X, but I think it was Max if I'm not mistaken. If you know the answer to that, let me know in the comments. I would love to know more about that game. Point aside, Max has always been a very strong character. He has great damage, he's got pretty good range on his moves, and he has very strong specials. His defensive specials got a lot of range, does a lot of damage, and recovers pretty fast. His offensive special probably has some of the fastest recovery out of all the special moves. It is really fast, and it immediately hits the opponent pretty much right away. Max is a grappling type character, so he does really well when he can throw a character. His throws do massive damage, and he's probably the best thrower in the game. His throws just do a ton of damage, and while he can't do a back throw, he can jump throw the opponent and slam them into other enemies, which can do a lot of damage. The only thing that's really bringing Max down is the fact that he is actually very slow, kind of at the same level as Streets of Rage 4 Axel, if you ask me. But that's kind of obvious considering he's a very big character, if you think about it. But of course, with his high damaging throws and attacks, especially his combo, and his jump attacks have great range, so he makes up for the lack of speed very effectively. So it's almost not an issue. And most people, to counter the slow issue, is spamming his dash attack is a pretty decent way to move around offensively and defensively at the same time. It doesn't do that much damage, and I wouldn't say is as strong as a Grand Upper or something like that, but overall it is a good tool to maneuver around if you're dealing with being too slow. So I find it more as a tool rather than a attack, so to speak. Now that we've gone through the, what I would say, balanced good characters, we're going to get a little more unfair now of these top three. I think personally these top three characters are just way over the top with what they have and are just flat out strong characters. Some of them are pretty much flawless. You'll see what I'm talking about when I go over them. The first character I'm going to be talking about is Floyd. Pretty much there's only one issue with Floyd, and that being he has kind of a large hitbox. But everything else about Floyd is pretty much great to amazing. I'd say gameplay-wise, he is pretty much a flawless character. The first thing to point out is his combo potential is not only simpler than other characters like Blaze and Axel, but it's also very effective and is very rewarding. For example, his combo attack, the fourth hit, is kind of like a small jab. But because it is short enough range and recovers fast enough, it gives him plenty of time to get a full dash attack in, giving him almost like a 6-7 hit combo guaranteed. Talking about the dash attack by itself, it has a lot of range, and it recovers faster than a normal dash attack from a Streets of Rage 4 character, if you ask me. It also has a pretty large hitbox compared to the other ones, and like I said, a lot of range. So very effective tool and a great combo ender. His specials aren't amazing, but they are effective and they definitely get the job done. His neutral special is plain and simple, gives him a little bit of invincibility and a nice little shield to knock back everyone. Pretty effective. But what makes him, I'd say, over the top, because originally I was actually going to put Max in S tier, but what I'd say puts Floyd over the top is when he throws someone. He is an absolute beast thrower, and I'd say he's even better than Max at throwing. Not necessarily in damage, but in effectiveness when it comes to throwing, and how he utilizes his throws puts him over Max. The first thing he can do is just flat out throw the opponent forward, kind of like a normal back throw. He also throws characters similar to Max's style, where he can jump around with the character and slam them on the ground, just like Max. Although it doesn't do, I'd say, as much damage as Max. For a little extra damage, standing and hitting your punch button will give him a few stomach punches. I believe you can get 2 in plus a additional throw for the most damage. I could be wrong on that though. And even cooler, when you are throwing an opponent, he can do a special throw. He can do like a throw special, my bad, where he can shock the opponent and then throw them, granting a little extra damage for the throw. Be careful doing this though, as he is very vulnerable. It only hits one player, or one opponent I should say, and doesn't throw far as much as a regular throw. But nevertheless, it's a high risk, high reward kind of move, and it's great for when dealing with bosses. To put an emphasis on his grabbing capability, his offensive special is kind of a scorpion spear style throw / Jax attack. I mean, he's basically Jax, but can kind of do a scorpion type move if you think about it. The move basically just brings the one enemy over so you can grab them. So that gives him the ability to utilize all of his throw potential. A classic combo you can do is the throw into 2 punches and into a special throw, which is what I can tell the most damage you can get out of a throw. I could be wrong on that, but that's what I have found. It at least costs the most to your health, that's for sure. But now, there's one thing that I think puts Floyd over the top as a character. Most characters struggle greatly when it comes to mobs of guys around them, or surrounding them, I should say. Most characters suffer greatly with mobs of guys front, back, up, and down, all over the character pretty much. But with Floyd, he thrives in those situations. And that's because I forgot to talk about one more special feature about his throw, which I think makes him S tier. Believe it or not, you can actually grab 2 players, which I'm sure you've seen before. This makes him do a headbutt style move that goes to massive amounts of damage. More than I think any of Max's throws, if I'm not mistaken. If not, it's still a crazy effective tool. So pretty much when you're getting mobbed with Floyd, you're just going to find yourself headbutting dudes over and over and over until they're all dead. It's the one situation he wants to be in, especially if there's a boss around, as it will do massive amounts of damage. And if you can get someone near the wall, I think you can even get a few extra hits in. And notice how I didn't say he was slow, because actually, he's quite fast, at least for a big character. If you spam the jump button, he can actually move pretty quickly for a big guy. Just kind of wanted to point that out there. I'm not sure if that's optimal to play him, but just wanted to point out he is not a slow character, I'd say. Even when he moves normally, he is not as slow as I anticipated. Overall, this character really doesn't have any flaws besides kinda having a big hitbox, but that is not really an issue considering everything he can do, and the fact that he has one of the most OP throw games in beat-em-up history, I'd say. The next character might be a surprise, and that's going to be Streets of Rage 1 Adam. Now, remember all the flaws I talked about with Axel? Imagine if all those flaws became strengths now, apart from him being a Streets of Rage 1 character. That would give you Streets of Rage 1 Adam. Now, there isn't too much of a difference between Streets of Rage 1 Adam and Streets of Rage 1 Axel. But what makes Adam that much better is his jump kick. It is the best jump kick, I'd say, in the entire game. It does a good chunky amount of damage. He recovers pretty much instantly, allowing you to jump spam very easily and take out a lot of enemies. And just look at the range on that fucking leg. It is ridiculous. Overall, not too much to say, just has amazing range, amazing damage, and the best jump kick in the game, making him a pretty OP character if you ask me. Overall, Adam's a pretty OP character, but lacks the fundamentals and tools like Floyd. So I'd say these 2 characters are quite even. Now, Floyd and Streets of Rage 1 Adam are very strong, maybe even a little OP, but I definitely wouldn't consider them broken. That can't be really said the same for the final character I'm about to talk about. The double S tier character, the most broken character in Streets of Rage 4. None other than the homie, the man, the myth, the legend, Shiva. Now, there's actually only one definitive reason why he is the best character in the game, but I want to talk about the other aspects of him before we get to that very reason. Because he's a pretty flawed character when you look at most of his aspects. Because believe it or not, without the special thing I'm going to talk about, I would consider him a lower A tier character on my tier list. First and foremost, he cannot pick up weapons at all. This is a classic thing from Streets of Rage 3, and it is because he is a boss character that does high amounts of damage. So it was only kind of fair to make him not pick up weapons, and that is definitely the case in this game. He definitely does not need weapons. The other thing that's pretty sad is that they nerfed his movement heavily in this game. Like, really badly. Originally in Streets of Rage 3, he used to have a roll himself, but instead of rolling a little bit, he would jump all the way across to the top or bottom of the screen, depending on what you inputted. Also, he used to be able to fully kind of run. Now you have to dash similar to Adam, and he recovers pretty slowly when you finish the dash. Kind of better to input a move to recover faster instead of doing nothing. Now on to the buffs and the good stuff. They gave him a kind of back overhead throw, which is kind of shitty if you ask me. But his back throw is pretty strong and does a hefty amount of damage. Kind of a theme I've saw with the Streets of Rage 3 characters. Another kind of shitty thing they did to Shiva, well, it's probably a good thing they did, is that they changed his back attack. It actually used to not be a back attack, it used to just be a forward elbow. It's now a backwards elbow. Back in the day, you used to be able to do infinite combos with this forward elbow attack. A boss's health can go from full to 0, including the extra lives. But it wasn't easy to pull off all the time because it did have some pushback, and you really could only get the true infinite if it was at a wall, because it did have a small hitbox. His specials are pretty good. His final clash kind of has slow recovery, but does pretty hefty damage, and is a great combo ender, which I'll talk about more later. And his defensive special is a cartwheel flame kick, which is very fast, recovers very well, and is just a very strong move. But that isn't why Shiva is so broken. Because as you noticed, he's strong, but it isn't amazing, right? He doesn't seem broken yet to you, right? Well, now I want to talk about what really throws this character above and beyond. What makes this character truly the GOAT of Streets of Rage 4. That move is his dash attack. Shiva has easily the strongest dash attack in the game. Now when you look at this move, it does not look like much. It's actually just his cartwheel kick if you really think about it. But see, that's the thing. It is his cartwheel kick. What's the big deal about that? It not only hits opponents in front of him, but behind him as well. Now you might ask, what else does that? I'll tell you what does that. Special moves. You know those moves that are designed to knock everyone around you out, and you kind of pay for it after with either health or an energy meter or something? Imagine being able to do that special move, but with no penalty at all. It acts more as a super move than it does an actual dash attack that's only designed to hit people in front of him. This move is basically a spammable special move, which that alone would put him in double S tier, as he can just spam this over and over and literally no one is able to touch him. If you spam this move, no enemy can touch you unless they come at a weird angle. But if it's a situation where this move can't hit you, then no character will be able to deal with it. That's how strong this move is. But that's not even where it ends. The damage on this move to enemies in front of him is ridiculous. Just like the other characters, you can use it as a combo ender, and it does insane amounts of damage. If you can do an optimal combo, you can pretty much take out an entire life bar with just one combo from Shiva. More damage than any character in the entire game. And if you're feeling a little risky, after you finish with the dash attack, you can actually get a final clash on most characters. The only characters you can't do this on, from my knowledge, are Estelle, the military girl boss, and the boss version of Shiva. Everyone else is fair game to an additional final clash to the face while they're on the ground. And it is not that hard to do. And you get massive rewards for it. This move alone is so overpowered and completely broken. I have never seen anything more busted in this game so far. and it is the reason why Shiva is easily the best character in this game. Even though being an extremely flawed character, not being able to pick up weapons, having kind of poor fundamentals in certain areas, this one move just covers all of that. Plus the damage she does is just absolutely out of this world. So that is my Streets of Rage 4 tier list. If you disagreed with anything or liked the list, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what people think about this, because I don't know the meta for this game so far. It kind of seems all over the place, but it'd be cool to get an idea on what the meta actually is. But this is kind of what I gathered after playing the game for over the week, and maybe over time this list will look completely different. But as of now, and just by my speculation, this is what I have gathered from my research. So I hope you liked it, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know, like I said, let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll maybe see you in another video. Take care.